Welcome to this course on creating an open source project in Python. We will cover the foundational tools and setup required to create your first open source project in Python. An open source software project are unique in the sense that everyone in the community can impact, modify, and enhance the source code under the supervision of typically a few volunteer community leaders who act as the project maintainers. The developers, as users themselves, understand the project's need and what features are lacking. Most open source projects do not have customer service and require some technical know-how to be able to use them. I know you're excited to build your project, but before that, we will go over some details that you need to know before starting the course. If you want to follow along with the course, it's helpful if you know the basics of Python programming, including working with packages and writing tests for your code. We will be using the terminal throughout the course to run the commands, manage our projects, and run Git commands. Now, if you want to have a good idea of the tools we use, you can watch the first couple of videos of each chapter where I go over the basics of the tools used for that chapter. Shall we begin? Poetry is both a Python packaging tool and a dependency management tool. In this course, though, we are only going to use Poetry as a dependency management tool. The most straightforward way of managing your dependencies in a Python project is to first list all the external libraries and their version numbers in the requirements.txt file. Then you use pip, which comes with both distribution of Python, to install the dependencies listed in the file. This is what we call the bare minimum setup. But there's some problems with it. To start with, you will end up with a lot of dependencies that you have no idea where they come from. For example, with this requirements.txt file, you will end up with all these libraries installed. Reason being that some of the libraries in the requirements.txt file depend on other libraries as well, and they will all get installed. This is to make sure that you have everything you need in this environment for your project to work. But then you end up with a lot more dependencies than what you're expecting. Now, to make things worse, if you're working with multiple projects, they won't be installed in isolated environments. In other words, each project's requirements.txt and all their dependencies will get mixed up with each other. And at the end of the day, you will have no idea which dependencies come from which project, because again, you can't trace where they're coming from. If you're lucky enough, everything will still work and you won't end up with conflicts. Sometimes it may happen that project requires a specific version of library, while other project requires a different version of it. The sense is not allowed to have two versions of the same library installed in the same environment. A conflict is created. You cannot get both projects working fine at the same time with same environment. And that's why we use Poetry. Poetry provides a solution for all these problems. First, it provides a way of tracking where dependencies comes from. The simple command poetry show --tree shows all your dependencies in a tree diagram, showing you exactly what you have in your environment and why they're there. The second thing Poetry provides are isolated environments for each project you create. And since they don't share the same environment, the risk of conflict is minimized. Finally, many projects support multiple versions of Python. If you ship your project to another person with a different version of Python, Poetry will try to find the appropriate versions of the dependencies automatically and install them to make sure it works for all supported versions of Python. Yes, Poetry is that great, so let's start using it. Installing Poetry is very simple. You can install it with pip, just like with any other Python library, but it is not recommended. Reason being that if you have multiple versions of Python in your computer, the installation of Poetry via pip is only tied to the Python version present during the install. This means that you would need to install Poetry separately for each version of Python. The solution is to install Poetry using a script hosted on install.pythonpoetry.org. It is a Python script that acts as an installer. By installing it this way, Poetry will be isolated and will have its own environment. Also, Poetry will be accessible between different Python versions and virtual environments in your computer. You can keep using whatever Python environment your project is in without installing Poetry in that environment. Pre-install using the script on install the Python poetry.org is easy. With the curl command, you can ask Python to run the script. Make sure you're running it with Python 3, not Python 2. If you're using PowerShell on Windows, you have to use the curl command in a slightly different way. Check the official documentation for exactly how. Once Poetry is installed, you can use Poetry -- version to check the version that was installed. To uninstall Poetry, run the same installer script with the -- uninstall flag. You can also install a specific version of Poetry by adding the version number with the -- version flag when running the installer script. Finally, drop the Poetry. Use the Poetry self update command. And these are the basic commands to manage your Poetry installation. So, let's have a look at how to start a Poetry project from scratch. I type ls to show that I'm in an empty directory, and then Poetry -- version to see that I already have Poetry version 1.1.13 installed. Then I start a project with command Poetry init, which starts the series of questions to set you up with the pyproject.toml configuration file. First of all, you're asked for the project name. Poetry suggested the name of your current directory, which in my case is OS in Python. But you can type in whatever name you liked. I'm fine with the default name, so I press enter. Next is the version of this project. Now, since Poetry uses semantic versioning, it defaults to version 0.1.0. And then, you can set it to another version if necessary. In my case, I press enter to use the default value suggested. Next, you're asked for a short description, which is optional and can leave blank. Then, you can set who the author of the project is, which defaults to your GitHub username. Next, you can specify a license for your project, which is always a good idea. The most popular ones used for open source projects are the MIT and Apache licenses. Let's type MIT here and press enter. Next, for the compatible Python versions, by default, Poetry will pick something for you depending on the current version of Python you have on your machine, which in my case is Python 3.10. So, Poetry will assume that this project supports compatible update from Python 3.10 up to Python 4. In other words, it will support anything above or equal to Python 3.10, but below Python 4. If you want to support older versions of Python, you can put in something like above or equal to Python 3.8. Then, you will be asked whether you want to define your dependencies interactively now. I would say no, since we are going to do that in another video later on. I would also say no to the next question. Again, we will do it in another video. At last, you will have to confirm whether you want all these answers to be used to generate a pyproject.toml. This is the chance for you to double check to see if everything is okay. But don't worry too much, since you can change it later on by editing the pyproject.toml file. And there you go. We have started a new project. It may seem like nothing happened, but to check, simply look at the directory and see that pyproject.toml file was created. Now, we can check the name and the version of our project with Poetry version command. And to enter Poetry's virtual environment for this project, you use the Poetry shell command. In the new environment, with pip list command, we see that we have the standard starter packages installed and nothing else. To exit the environment, just type exit and press enter. And there you go. Our base project is set up. But before we add our dependencies, let's take a look at what the pyproject.toml file does. Let's have a look at the pyproject.toml. It is a text file to specify what build dependencies your Python package needs. It was proposed in the Python Enhancement Proposal, or PEP 518, and is widely adopted since. Even if we are not packaging our project, We can also use pyproject.toml with Poetry to manage our project dependencies. In PEP 518, pyproject.toml is proposed to solve a build dependency problem that has arisen in Python community. Before, most Python softwares use setup.py to specify the build dependencies, such as other Python packages that they are depending on. However, being an executable file itself, setup.py may require certain Python packages to work properly. This creates a chicken and egg problem. Therefore, instead of relying on setup.py or to build dependencies, including those required by setup.py should be listed in another file. After considering several different file formats, such as JSON and YAML formats, the TOML format was chosen, and the pyproject.toml file became the new standard of listing dependencies in Python projects. This is the pyproject.toml of our project. It was generated by Poetry. When we initialize the project, Poetry asks, use some questions when you run the Poetry init command and create this file for you depending on your answers. These sections, starting with tools.poetry in the header, will be used by Poetry. The first section holds the information about your project or package. The other two sections list all the dependencies of your project. One for the dependencies needed to run the project or required to make the software work, and another for the dependencies that are needed only when you are developing the project. For example, packages required for testing the code. Finally, the last section shows what tools are required to build this package. But since we are not talking about packaging in this course, we will not go into details here, and this is what it is for now. Later, when more dependencies are added, there will be more information about what libraries are required in this product. Back to our command line interface, it's turn to add some dependencies to the project using the Poetry add command, followed by the library and its version that you want. For example, our project uses Click, a library to create pretty command line interfaces. There are many ways to specify what version of the library are required. If you are not sure about how, check the documentation of Poetry. Here we show some common examples. For example, with Click, we want the compatible update of version HCon 1.0. Once you run the command, the dependency is installed, and you can see it by using the Poetry show command to see all the available packages that are installed. Now, to add development dependency, we simply add the --dev flag to add command. For example, we want to add the latest version of pytests to our development environment. We type Poetry add --dev pytest at latest. Now, if you have many dependencies, you can add them all in one single command. You can even skip specifying the versions and let Poetry select them for you, judging from the compatibility or your current environment setup. To do that, you simply list them after the death threat like this. So now that I've got everything installed, I will run Poetry show again and see that there are an overwhelming number of things installed. But if we add the --tree flag, we can see the dependencies, the tree hierarchy. At this point, we can go into the virtual environment by using Poetry shell, and then use the tip list command to see all the installed libraries, which, as you can see, Poetry provides a much better view than this.